Living wage, but there are warnings of the effect on businesses. And increasing rates of global obesity. A major new study finds that there are now more adults in the world who are classified as obese than underweight. And the British man who posed for a photo with his hijacker says he has no regrets. Good evening and welcome to BBC News. The Business Secretary, Sajid Javid, has told workers at the threatened Port Talbot steel plant that their industry is vital to the UK. The plant is owned by the Indian firm Tata, which has announced plans to sell its loss-making UK operations, which employ nearly 15,000 people. Mr Javid said the government had been engaged with Tata for weeks about the plant's future. Our Wales correspondent Hal Griffith reports now from Port Talbot.
Not far from the blast furnaces, Sajid Javid today arrived in the heat of a crisis 3 days in.
So you're not going to let us go to the war?
We're going to do everything we can.
The Business Secretary was on the other side of the world when Tata announced the sale of its UK business on Tuesday. No one was sent to speak to these workers in his place. He insists he had been talking to the company for months, but was still surprised.
One thing that was new was talk afterwards about the time frame of the sale, which I got concerned about, and that's why I've rushed back here, is because talk of 3 or 4 weeks wasn't what I had in mind.
The workers here had hoped for some detail. They got little, but were they impressed?
It depends how much we trust them now, really. Do we really trust them? It has to come out in the open a bit more now, really.
Do you?
Not at the moment, no.
It seems positive.
But it seems positive.
The government has already said no to full nationalisation, so what options are left? A private sale would be the answer to its prayers, but there are no obvious buyers. So some form of supported sale, with incentives to keep the business going in the meantime, might appeal. The alternative would be to allow it to fail. Financially much cheaper, but politically it could come at a huge cost. It's hard to overestimate what's at stake here. Jobs at this works come with a £30,000 starting salary. Nothing in this area can really compete on the same scale. And yet people's horizons here are broad, especially when it comes to looking at what's happening in other countries. Britain isn't the only country that's seen its steel industry in meltdown. This plant in France was largely mothballed when its owners decided to sell. Efforts to impose tariffs on cheap imported steel are supported by some European governments, but not the UK.
The French are in favour of lifting this rule that prevents duties from being sufficiently high to prevent damage to the industry, and yet here we are, the UK is standing in the way of a method to actually solve the problems that we're facing today.
Scott's the third generation of his family to work here. His father is nearing retirement, but worried about his pension. Scott feels the whole family's been let down.
I don't think it's going to be a future here.
For you or for your dad
For
either?
me, for my father, even for my little boy. I don't think it's a future for anyone.
As he left Port Talbot, the Business Secretary will have known all eyes are on what he does next, and if he can make up for lost time. Hywel Griffith, BBC News, Port Talbot.
Let's join our Wales correspondent Thomas Morgan now, who's at the Tata Steel plant in Port Talbot. Thomas.
Yes, well, I think when Sajid Javid came here today, there was a sense of resentment from the people that live and work in the plant behind me. They were slightly sceptical about the visit. They were wondering what had taken him so long. Well, obviously, he'd been on the other side of the world, and in the meantime, other political parties are here to pledge their support to the workers here and to this town. And actually there was some hope from what Mr Javid said. He said he'd been in talks, and I think some workers were buoyed from what he had to say. And instantly after his visit here, here's what some of the workers had to say in response to his visit.
I think it's very positive. I think he gives some positive answers, but we're waiting for it to unfold exactly what it does mean to us. It seems like a lifeline has been thrown our way. We don't want no handouts, we don't want no charity, we just want to show people what we can do.
It depends how much we trust them now, really. Do we really trust them? It has to come out in the open a bit more now, really.
Do you?
Not at the moment, no.
he seems like he's trying to do his best. It's positive rather than yesterday. Like, we didn't know it was up for sale for the last 18 months. I can't read in the papers it's been up for sale, which we didn't know about.
We knew we were bad, but what they delivered to us was unbelievable. Like, they more or less, they want to cut the umbilical cord. If they could have sold us, they'd sell us. That's what it sounds like, because they cannot compete in this market. We need help from the government and from the British suppliers and things. We need that sort of help. No handouts. We don't want that. We don't want charity, nothing at all. Just want an even playing field.
I think what will really scare people from what Mr. Javid has said today, or maybe really cause more doubts, is the fact that that loose period of about 3 to 4 weeks has been discussed. I think before today we were hoping and the government would have more time to find a buyer, but as Mr. Javid said, he seems to be playing with a period of weeks rather than a month to find a buyer. Now, earlier this week, Carwyn Jones, the First Minister of Wales, was on the phone with Tata bosses in Mumbai, urging them to give them more time, to give them months and not weeks. Yet, here we are. We've heard today officially from Mr. Javid that it will actually be weeks. Now, we've already heard from Howell's Package earlier on how important this company and this business is to local people in this area. For every one job here supports another 4 in the local area. So if, for example, if the 4,000 people here were to be made redundant, it would have huge implications on not only Port Talbot but the surrounding areas. So the clock is now really ticking, not just for Port Talbot but for the future of the British steel industry.
But Thomas, what are the options that are still open to local politicians, steelworkers and their unions?
Well, I think they'll continue to lobby the government, continue to lobby them to bring down the subsidies when it gets to energy costs, because if they feel, if they can bring those costs down in some sort of way, it will really entice private buyers to buy this company. Because at the moment, it's difficult to see why a private buyer would want to buy this company, considering that it's losing so much money every day, estimated £1 million a day. Now, nobody's going to want to take that debt on and this workforce on without a guarantee that they're going to be able to turn it into a profitable business. So that's one option. The second is that they do take it over in the interim period. That's the government, for example. So they do have more time to find a private buyer, so that Tata don't mothball the site in the couple of weeks that they've given to find a buyer. But the third option is, of course, that this place does get mothballed and the jobs do get lost. Now, that would cut costs, because there is a suggestion that Tata and Mumbai don't particularly want to sell to a rival company, because of course what would be the benefit of that for them? So a number of options on the table, but really these are really dangerous times for the people living in this area and also everyone working for the company across the UK.
Thomas, thank you very much. Thomas Morgan in Port Talbot. Well, we'll find out how this story is covered in tomorrow's front pages in the papers at 10:40 this evening. Our guests joining us tonight are the journalist and broadcaster from France 24, Bénédicte Paviot, and David Torrance, who writes for The Herald. An Islamist extremist has been found guilty of planning an attack against American forces based in Britain. Both Junaid Khan and his uncle Shazib Khan were convicted of preparing to join the militants in Syria. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford has been following the story from Kingston Crown Court.
Before he was arrested last summer, IS supporter Junaid Khan was a delivery driver dropping off medicines to chemists like Boots and Lloyd's in East Anglia. And it was while he was driving past the American air bases there that he first had the idea of killing a US serviceman before being egged on by his IS contact inside Syria. The black flag of so-called Islamic State hanging on the wall behind him in his bedroom in Luton, this is Junaid Khan, who was planning the first attack on US servicemen in the UK and was being helped and advised by an IS recruiter in Syria. His intended targets, American air bases in East Anglia, including RAF Lakenheath. His plan, to slaughter a US airman in an attack similar to the one on Drummerley Rigby. His weapon, this knife he was trying to buy, or even a homemade bomb.
His intention was to target a US military officer by staging a car crash. He was then going to use a knife to attack that US military individual. He had also researched quite extensively and got instructions on how to make a bomb.
As Junaid Khan made his plans last summer, his friend from Luton, Abu Aziz, seen here on the left, was killed by the Americans in Syria. An IS leader and planner of attacks on the West, he was in a vehicle destroyed by a drone. This seems to have increased Junaid Khan's determination. When police arrested him last July, his iPhone contained the key evidence of his planned attack, including an online conversation with Junaid Hussain, an infamous IS recruiter and propagandist based in Raqqa. Using the encrypted social media app SureSpot, Junaid Hussain advised Junaid Khan it's best to have at least pipe bombs or pressure cooker bomb in a backpack in case something happens, so you can do istishadi or suicide bomb in case they try arrest you. Junaid Khan replied, "Definitely, depends on the ingredients, on getting hold of them." "I'll send you a file now, inshallah," Junaid Hussain wrote back, and then sent him instructions on how to make a bomb. When Junaid Khan announced his intention to target US servicemen at air bases in Britain, Junaid Hussain in Syria had immediately offered to help. Just over a week later, Junaid Khan was arrested, and 6 weeks after that, Junaid Hussain was killed by an American drone strike. Their plot abruptly terminated. Junaid Hussain, who came from Birmingham, had been one of IS's most prolific propagandists, which is why the Americans regarded him as so dangerous.
You know, unlike a single fighter with an AK-47 on the ground in Syria, he had the potential through his cyber efforts to reach across the sea and to motivate, radicalize, and inspire violence in foreign countries around the world.
With 2 of his IS contacts dead from American drone strikes, Junaid Khan now faces a long prison sentence for his part in plotting to kill US servicemen based in Britain. Daniel Sanford, BBC News at Kingston Crown Court.
The Liberal Democrat leader Tim Farron has been on a 2-day tour of key council battlegrounds to launch the party's English local election campaign. The Lib Dems sustained heavy losses in council elections during their time in the coalition government, but Mr Farron says he believes the party has the opportunity to make ground in cities such as Sheffield, Hull and Newcastle.
I think what we've seen in places like Hull over the last several years, that the Labour Party takes big cities in the north for granted, just as Conservatives take the more affluent areas of the north for granted, and that's wrong. What you want is an opposition that actually cares for the communities they seek to represent. It's what we do so well here, and it's why I'm very positive and optimistic about our chances of going forward in May.
Tim Farron, the Lib Dem leader. A murder investigation has begun into the death of a 25-year-old prisoner at Coldingley Prison in Woking. The prison service named the dead man as Madala Washington. Surrey police say that they are investigating what happened. Coldingley is a Category C training prison. The prison service says the death will be investigated by the Independent Prisons and Probation Ombudsman. Sainsbury's is to take over Argos after its parent company, Home Retail Group, agreed a sale for £1.4 billion. The move will create a business larger than that of Marks & Spencer or John Lewis. Sainsbury's will relocate a number of Argos stores into its supermarkets. Plans to reopen part of the main airport in Brussels have been put on hold after a strike by airport police over security. The airport has been closed for 11 days since suicide attacks on the departures hall and also on the Brussels metro, which killed 32 people. The police union is demanding improved security measures to screen people before they're allowed into airport terminals. It's a good day for millions of low-paid workers. They've been given a pay rise by the government through the National Living Wage. All workers over the age of 25 will be paid at least £7.20 an hour. But there are warnings today that thousands of jobs could be at risk because of the higher wage bill. Our economics correspondent Andy Verity reports.
If you work in a job like this on the minimum wage, you might well have a reason to smile to yourself today. If you're 25 or over, you just got a pay rise of more than 10%. That's 4 times as much as your better paid colleagues.
I'm trying to start saving for a house at the moment. I've got a little bit of savings, but obviously that extra money per year will mean I'll be able to put a bit more away, hopefully get there sooner than I would otherwise.
Not so great if you're under 25. You'll now be collecting less cash than your colleagues just because you were born a little later.
We work as hard as each other, and it does get a bit frustrating at the fact that people over 25 get this pay rise but people under don't, and I think it's a bit unfair.
The living wage should cause a so-called ripple effect, where employers lift the pay of workers on the next rung of the pay ladder by a similar amount. So 1.8 million people earning less than £7.20 will get an instant pay rise, but over the coming year, 2 million full-time workers can expect an average boost of £860, while 2.4 million part-time workers will bank an average gain of £380. Now, when the hourly rate rises to £9 an hour by 2020, it will cost employers just over £3 billion a year. Now, companies could try to absorb that cost and accept lower profits, but others will be forced to raise their prices.
Every business can't afford a 7 or 8% every year increase in wage. I mean, that's the pressure that it's going to put people under. You know, we're a large organisation, so we can absorb bits of cost, but when it becomes, you know, a size that it is, where does that money come from?
Many of the lowest paid workers have partners who also work and may earn more than average. So the benefits dished out by the Chancellor's living wage policy aren't at all concentrated on the poorest households. Of the extra billions, the biggest portion goes to those in the middle. Andy Verity, BBC News.
You're watching BBC News. Let's remind you of our headlines this evening. The Business Secretary tries to reassure steel workers who are at risk of losing their jobs in Port Talbot, but he's under pressure over the government's handling of the crisis. A Luton delivery driver is convicted of an Islamic State-linked plot to kill an American airman in Britain. On the up, the new national wage means more than 1 million people get a pay rise from today. A teenager who stabbed 16-year-old Bailey Gwynn to death at his school in Aberdeen has been detained for 9 years. The boy, who can't be named for legal reasons, was convicted of culpable homicide last month. Our Scotland correspondent Lorna Gordon was outside the High Court in Edinburgh a short while ago and sent us this update.
Well, Bailey Gwynn died after a school lunch break. Argument over a biscuit escalated into a fight and ended with him being stabbed through the heart. He was a very popular pupil in the 5th year of Colts Academy in Aberdeen. His friends said he was gentle and quiet, and there was considerable outpouring of grief in the community at his death. Today, here at the High Court in Edinburgh, both Bailey Gwynn's family and the family of the 16-year-old who killed him were in court to hear the judge, Lady Stacey, hand down her sentence. She said the youth had shown significant regret and understanding of the loss he had caused, but added that if he had not carried a knife, the insults would at worst have led to a fist fight. The teenager's lawyer said his client was profoundly sorry for his actions and recognised there was nothing he could do to reverse the events of the day which led to Bailey Gwynn's death. The 16-year-old will serve at least part of his sentence in a young offenders institution and will be eligible to apply for parole once half his sentence has been served.
Lorna Gordon in Edinburgh. Some of the other stories making BBC News headlines tonight, and hundreds more armed police officers are to be stationed across the country in order to deal with any Paris-style terrorism attack. Police forces across England and Wales have begun recruiting an extra 1,500 firearms officers. There will also be a rise in the number of high-speed armed response vehicles. Greater Manchester has become the first English region to take responsibility from Whitehall for running its own health services today. A new body comprising 10 local councils, 15 NHS trusts, a dozen clinical commissioning groups and NHS England will control a £6 billion budget. Northern Irish drug smuggler Michaela McCollum has been released from prison in Peru. She and Melissa Reid from Scotland were caught with 11 kilograms of cocaine at Lima's International Airport in August 2013. The women initially claimed they'd been kidnapped and forced to carry drugs, but later admitted the charges. The pair were jailed for 6 years and 8 months. There are now more adults in the world classified as obese than underweight, according to a major new study. The research looked at almost 20 million adults from 1975 to 2014. It found obesity in men has tripled to nearly 11% overall and more than doubled in women to nearly 15%. And as our health editor Hugh Pym reports, the problem in the UK is predicted to get worse.
Knees up, breathe. Hold that tummy in.
This could be one part of winning the battle of the bulge and the struggle to control weight and improve health.
So we're going to walk forward.
Loretta is a personal trainer working with those who might feel inhibited going to a gym. She had her own weight challenges and knows all about the obstacles to shedding the pounds.
I'm big now, but I was much bigger, and I went to a variety of classes, and I just couldn't keep up. I injured myself, I had a poor experience, I was singled out and I felt uncomfortable, but my classes are hopefully for everyone.
The report illustrates the dramatic increase in global obesity. In 1975, 3.2% of men were obese. By 2014, that had more than tripled to 10.8%. 6.4% of women were obese in 1975. It was nearly 15% by 2014. As for the UK, by 2025 it's predicted to have the highest obesity levels in Europe for women, and the highest in Europe for men as well, level with Ireland. Exercise and personal responsibility clearly have an important part to play in tackling the weight issue, but there's an increasing focus now on the role of food and drink companies and whether they should be doing more with what they offer to help consumers cut the calories. The Chancellor announced a sugar tax on fizzy drinks in the budget, and government action to curb supermarket price promotions is expected. Some experts say manufacturers need to be pushed in the right direction.
It's what I call lazy capitalism. It's the food industry doing the easiest thing to try and make money. The industry needs to be made to work harder. We need regulation, policies and programmes that level the playing field.
But some out enjoying the sunshine today said it was really down to all of us.
It's very difficult, but people have to make a change themselves. Can't always blame the government for everything.
If you grow up eating crisps and all of the rest of it, it's going to be very difficult to get out of that particular circle.
But while many are working to control their weight, there's clearly a lot more heavy lifting needed to avoid the predicted obesity epidemic. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The British man who posed for a photograph next to an aeroplane hijacker who was wearing a suspected suicide belt has been explaining why he did what he did. Ben Innes was one of the passengers on board an Egypt Air flight that was hijacked on Wednesday. He told the BBC he wanted to take a closer look at the belt to see if it was fake or real and that he had no regrets, as Sophie Long reports.
This is the image that shot Ben Innes to fame as the picture he hashtagged best selfie ever went viral on social media. Ben is on the right, beside him Saif Eldin Mustafa, wearing what at the time was believed to be a suicide belt. Ben had dozed off at the beginning of the flight and didn't believe the colleague he was travelling with when he woke and was told they'd been hijacked.
I felt totally nonchalant. I was just like, no, we haven't, whatever, you know.
So you didn't actually believe him?
No, I didn't believe him. I didn't, I hadn't seen any evidence of it happening myself. We hadn't been blown up. We're still, going through it. So I was like, well, until I see something, that looks like a hijacker, I'm not about to sort of start worrying about this situation overly.
The majority of those on board had been allowed to leave by the time Ben approached the hijacker. 6 others, though, were still being held hostage, prompting criticism from national newspapers. Ben says asking for a picture was his attempt to influence a tense situation.
I wanted to interact with this guy. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't a threat. I also wanted to get a closer look at this bomb, see if I could see. I've got no expertise in that field. But, there might have been a telltale sign that it was fake or real. I also just thought, if the worst does come to the worst, I want my family and my friends to know that, I died how I lived, having as much fun as I can.
What would you say then to some security specialists who say, actually, this wasn't a very sensible thing to do and you were putting other passengers who were still being held hostage on that plane at risk?
I'd say all these experts and, specialists, and also say to all the keyboard warriors out there who've got an opinion on the matter, that was a situation I was in, and those are the actions I took, and I in no way regret them, and I have no blemishes upon my conscience about any of the actions I took that day, and I would do exactly the same thing, exactly the same way, in the exact same situation.
After what was a terrifying ordeal, Ben and everyone else on board flight MS-181 emerged safely to tell the tale. He says it hasn't changed his attitude to flying or asking for pictures.
Yeah, you know, it's a great selfie.
Sophie Long, BBC News.
Some breaking news to bring you now regarding a woman from London who's taking part in the Clipper Round the World yacht race. According to the organisers, they say that 40-year-old Sarah Young, who was from London, who was one of the crew members, died after her boat was hit by a wave. The winds were said to be about 35 or 40 knots, and Sarah was tidying up the cockpit at the time when the wave hit her boat and swept her under the guardrail. The race organisers say that they used the safety drills that are necessary in a situation like this, but Sarah Young has died as a result of this incident. So that 40-year-old Sarah Young, taking part in the Round the World Clipper yacht race, has died. We'll bring you more details when we get them. Every household should have a smart meter installed by 2020, according to government plans, allowing us to measure our gas and electricity consumption digitally. It'll mean that consumers and energy companies can see exactly how much is being used, putting an end to estimates and home visits. It could also encourage households to use energy in a more cost-effective way. Our industry correspondent John Moylan has been to a town in Cornwall taking part in a smart meter trial to find out more.
A new eco-home in Cornwall. But the family that built it are still worried about the cost of energy.
Come to fit your electricity meter.
Today they're getting a new smart meter and a new sunshine tariff linked to locally generated solar power.
We've had a bit of a shock to find that, like most families, we have actually quite high electricity bills. And it's a matter of trying to find out why they're so high and how we can bring them down.
I'll certainly try and run my big appliances during the day to make sure that we're making the most of the cheap tariff. And also, I think with the smart meter, it'll help us to see what we're using and when.
All right, I'm just going to turn the power off now. Should be about half an hour.
So no more estimated bills. Their supplier can read their meter remotely and charge different prices for energy at different times of the day.
Here in the southwest of England, they get a lot more sunshine than many other parts of the UK, and that's why there are so many of these really large-scale solar farms. But we can't yet store all of the electricity being pumped out of places like this cost-effectively. And that's why trials like the sunshine tariff with smart meters means a lot more of this electricity can be used close to where it's being generated.
Other suppliers are trying to shift when we use energy to off-peak times. Roger Tomlin signed up to a British Gas smart meter tariff that offered free electricity on Saturdays.
We started saving up the washing. 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, bang, on goes the washing machine. An hour and a half later, out in the tumble dryer, next lot of washing in. And also, instead of using gas, put a couple of fan heaters on, keep the house warm. I'm in almost total control of what I'm using and have knowledge of what my